All right, everybody, welcome back. I've got an interesting one here for you. I would like to talk about underplayed and overplayed cards in the guise of top five, but I don't know if these really have a ranking so per se, but I do have like my underplayed top card is like these need to be played more. But to start off, we have some honorable mentions of Lead Astray, Tactical Move, Whirling Blades, and Riptide, or any other card that has forced movement behind it. Forced movement is very strong in the game where positioning matters the most. Forced movement can be really good against enemy avatars. Forced movement can really help a big tempo swing. Forced movement is very, very strong, and I think a lot of cards or decks underutilize movement. Whirlwind, I know isn't really a good card, but if it was a cantrip and it moved things, it would be really, really good. Kind of like how Blink is really strong. But yeah, force movement. Another one that is kind of underplayed right now and it has a lot of potential is Helpful Hob. I know it's 1 power, but Helpful Hob can untap a 4 power unit, attack for 8 at the same site. It's kind of like a grapple shot, but it also has the upside of if you're on turn 4 or later, you can double land drop and really restrict people on mana. Helpful Hob can be very strong. And here, top 5 or the 5th overplayed card I think is Sir Balin. I know I played it in my Air Fire Sorcerer aggro list, but essentially it's just a 4/4 for 4. Yeah, it has a really high upside, but it takes extra work to put into it. Sir Balin has a huge target on the back. It doesn't do anything right when you play it. Just kind of middling in my mind. Number 5 underplayed card here, Town. Town is a tower for exceptionals. It's if you're in fire, a lot of your best minions are in fire or exceptional in fire. Dapro Vampire is an exceptional. So what you can do is play a site, turn 2 Town, turn 3 Tower, go to 4 mana for the turn and play it on Town. So you have a turn 3 Vampire. That seems pretty strong. Town can also really just help with double spelling later in the game. If you have 2/3 drop exceptionals, you can drop it on Town on turn 4. Town can be very, very explosive. Number 4 overplayed card here, I think, is Apprentice Wizard. Apprentice Wizard is fine. I've seen it in a lot of sorcerer decks. You have the card draw. You don't need an Apprentice Wizard. I would much rather have a 3/3 for 3 than pay 3 mana to draw a possible 3/3. Apprentice Wizard does help you go through your deck quicker. Outside of Death Speaker, I just don't think it's really needed because the tempo hit and the slow, you just kind of you spend one of your 10 to 15 cards you're getting that game on a 3/3 or 3 mana 1/1. It does have spellcaster, but it's just not high enough upside to be in that top 15 cards you need to win. Unless you're in Death Speaker, then you get a whole other thing going for you. And to go with Apprentice Wizard, Land Surveyor is also up here in my why are you playing Land Surveyor outside of Death Speaker? And if you really need that card draw, play Kettletop Leprechaun. Kettletop is twice as good as Land Surveyor. It's 2 power instead of 1. They're gonna die. Minions die in the game all the time, and you generally don't need that site the turn you play Land Surveyor or Leprechaun. You need it in 2 turns so you can draw another spell and still make land drops. And by then, Kettletop will have died, traded, or dealt more damage than Land Surveyor has. Play Kettletop over Land Surveyor. My 4th underplayed card here is Pond. Pond is just so good. It's beast specific, yes, but the more cards that get printed, the more beasts that will get printed. It fixes threshold. That's just the biggest part here. It's a tower for beasts, and it fixes threshold. So turn 2 cat, turn 2 unicorn. can be a huge kind of like turn 3 Pudge Butcher kind of like situation where, well, can you deal with this on turn 2? Your turn 2? This can just help set up the huge like tempo gain in the early game. If you punch for 4 and then say you're on the play, they play a second sight, don't do anything. You punch for 4, you play a third sight, you play something else, and they play their third sight and bury whatever you played. Like, that's totally fine. You've already got a hit in, you're ahead of curve. Pond is really, really strong. All right, and then my third overplayed card here is Brother Knight. These overplayed cards are a little sketchy, just because I'm not really sure what overplayed really means, but outside of Flamecaller, I think Brother Knight is just bad. You're paying 4 mana for 2 bodies, which is good, but it dies to kobolds and violence, and with the ring out in force, it dies really easily to the ring. That 2 toughness is really frustrating, because if they play a 2 mana violent, they kill one of your Brother Knight. All right, fine. But then you try to attack or do something with the other Brother Knight, you just trade into the violent. So they spent 2 mana to your 4. Outside of Flamecaller, where you don't get really much extra value from your minions dying, Brother Knight is kind of bad in my mind. And number 3 underplayed card is Annual Fair. Annual Fair fixes threshold so easily. You're paying 4 for Magana, 2 for Plague of Frogs or Browse, or 2 for Divine Healing. Like the triple threshold 1 mana, 2 mana, 3 mana things. Annual Fair works wonderfully with that. You can also do the Island of Leviathan shenanigans. And if you're paying a little bit extra for it, it's more advantageous to pay that extra mana than not cast anything that turn. Not casting anything that in a turn is almost a death sentence in a competitive format. Annual Fair is a very low cost of include. It doesn't mess up your threshold, it just helps. I feel like this is kind of in the same vein of Valley Delight. Valley Delight should be 2 of in every single deck, but Annual Fair is very, very strong. My number 2 on overplayed cards is Troll Bridge. Troll Bridge, I don't know. It gives your opponent a choice. It's so much worse than Free City. I know it gives you threshold, but man, I don't know any time where I'm like, this Troll Bridge is costing me the game. If I really need to attack with a 2/2 or a 3/3, I'll just discard a thing and get you to door. And if I have a 4/4, it doesn't matter. It's just Troll Bridge is not a good defensive site in my mind. Number 2 underplayed card is kind of a double. It's the Ablaze cycle. Hamlet's Ablaze and Castle's Ablaze. These are great threshold screwing cards. Like, you can mess up somebody's threshold really easily. It can be a good tempo swing too. Now, I don't really love like turn 3 Blaze, because then they get their sight for another turn. But I think it's like more of a turn 5 or 6 play to go along with another minion, and keep them off of 4 or 5 mana. Like, that's kind of like my idea here. It's a tempo swing. It's if they're on the draw, and you Hamlet the Blaze on turn 5, sets them back to turn 4 and 3. Like, it just messes up with the curve. I think Hamlet's Ablaze and Castle's Ablaze is really strong into like Magoo as a 1 or 2 of. Like, don't go too heavy in it. It's more of a just kind of like mess up their threshold and knock them off their feet for a turn. I think the Ablazes can be really, really, really strong. And my number 1 overplayed card is Quarrelsome Kobolds. I love Quarrelsome Kobolds. I think it's a great card. But in the current state of the game with Ring of Morrigan and Tor's Hammer Trinket and Violence and other kobolds running around, these things just die so easily. Quarrelsome Kobolds falls to Violent, but the difference there is you're paying 1 less mana with a Violent than a Kobolds. You're getting the same effect with a Violent. If it sticks around and does 2 damage, great. Coruscant Kobolds does have an higher upside, but a lot of the time your opponent will have a 3/3 blocker, or the ring, or some kind of ping damage just to remove kobolds instantly. And that's where I think kobolds kind of falls off. And if you're paying 2 mana to deal 2 with Violent, it's already done its job. You've only paid 2 mana instead of 3. Violent, I think, is just a better kobold, and I would rather play a 3/3 currently in the meta, just because the ring makes kobolds and that 2 power just kind of feel very, very fragile. And also, like, in alpha and beta and 40/20 meta, like, kobolds were really strong because you had desert plus anything else deal 3. Now people have ring and deserts, and just more feels like more things to incidentally remove 3/3s. Kobolds just kind of falls a little bit short for me. And my top underplayed card is a double up. Grant Famine and Black Plague. These are amazing site controls. People play Chaos Twister for the hard removal. Great Famine and Black Plague are better than that. It is the 4 mana hard removal, also hits Root Spider and things burrowed. It also is huge site control. I will move over to some TTS gameplay to explain that further. Alright, and then here in this scenario, I really need to show how good the Famine is, or the Plague. Either of these would work in this situation. So, the Druid, hypothetically, was on the draw, and I'm on the play. So I'm going to my 4th turn. I can play a Arid Desert, go to 4 mana, play Great Famine. Great Famine will kill Unicorn and sticks around. And I have a Perilous Bridge here on 13. So his option is to play the Lone Tower. But he can't play the Lone Tower because it'll just die to Great Famine. So hypothetically, he draws a spell, tap the Druid, play a site. Now, where do you play Bodyguard to pressure me? Like, you're on his turn 4. You can play Bodyguard here, sure, but I'm not going to play a site to 15. Like, this is where the Famine is so strong in, like, tempo. The other option is to play here at 7, and hopefully I matched his site, which, sure, I can. So I hypothetically draw a site, get a town, it doesn't matter what it is. Now I have 2 options in hand. I can either trade my two cards into his Bodyguard, and at this point, playing a Druid mid-range, I'm scared of Grapple Shots and Whirling Blades and some kind of blowout card. So I kind of want to keep the board clear. Another option for town is to play it like back 1 step, or over here on the 15. And in this scenario, I'm not trying to be the aggressor. I'm Sorcerer. I want him to use all of his resources before he can really, like, gain any advantage. The other cheeky thing you do, if maybe with Sir Lamerick, is play it to Famine. Famine kills Lamerick and then kills his Bodyguard. So the board is still clear and Famine is still here. So now he's at 4 mana, has a Grandmaster and Wizard in hand, and a Shield Maidens. I don't really care about Shield Maidens. Shield Maidens is a support card. Draw a spell. All right, he gets Leprechaun. He plays Leprechaun here. Great Famine is gonna. It doesn't matter. So I'm now able to draw a spell. I get a vampire, so that's great. But right now I still want to just use his resources. So I can tap and draw another spell because I'm at 5, and none of this really, I feel no pressure, so I can do whatever I want. Famine and Plague are so useful in relieving pressure. You can have 2 or 3 turns of awkward draws from your opponent. So end of my turn, Leprechaun's gonna die anyway, so I can play a vampire here to 15. Now I have possible pressure. I still have my removal spells in hand, so this is still very, very strong. Or I can even play vampire here and use Warhorse next turn to attack Windmill. And then Warhorse will die, Famine will stick around. So, end of my turn, Leprechaun dies, he draws a sight. Rift Valley is pretty good for him. Tap, play Rift Valley. But even like this scenario is still pretty good for me. Like, he can move like this. He can split my sights part like this, but he doesn't have the follow-up, so he's probably not going to do that. He can play Rift Valley and kind of like push me aside, but this still gives me my vampire an avenue attack, so maybe it's just Perilous Bridge over, and maybe there's some scenario in the where he can like defend this and use this as an attack vector, so that can be good. Maybe that plays it there, but then he plays Shield Maidens here. Like, sure, why not? But you can see where he's like, he needs to get to his 6th for Grandmaster, but Whirling Blades is kind of a dead card, and Great Famine is still around. So I go to my turn, draw another spell, Warhorse up and attack for 2, and then with my Vampire, and I can attack his Maidens, and now I have 2 minions on board, but Warhorse will die, but Famine is still here. And now I have like so much blocking potential, and he gets a Perilous Bridge, plays Grandmaster, draws 3. Divine Healing's pretty good, but like no pressure. Like, and then Famine is still here. Famine and Plague enable this whole strategy. Unless somebody gets dispelled, you can keep it around. You can choose to get rid of it. There's so much power in this board control with Famine. This is why Magoo is really good with it, and I think these spells need to be played more. The Famine and Black Plague are really, really strong in board control, and it's 4 mana removal, but it's so much more than that. And thank you everybody for watching. I know I haven't done any gameplay in the last couple weeks, but hopefully my goal is next week to have some gameplay of a cool, interesting deck. I'm still thinking about it, so if anybody has any suggestions, let me know in the comments. And like and subscribe. I'll be here next week. See ya.